focus on it. Because there is a trend in the gospel-centered world over the last few years to kind of label everything that we have any passion about or anything that we care about or enthusiastic about as an idol. And I don't want to do that here. Because, a lot of that has been overdone, and I think you can, by over-relying on the idol of whatever, family, marriage, you can kind of steer people toward a kind of Christian Buddhism that is just devoid of any sort of desire or emotions or, things to be enthusiastic about. But I think if we unpack what an idol actually is and look at the definition of evangelism, it'll become clear how evangelism has become an idol. My favorite definition, a lot of people go to Keller for, in his book, Counterfeit Gods, when talking about idols, but I prefer Piper's definition. He says that an idol is anything that we come to rely on for some blessing or help or guidance in the place of wholehearted reliance on the true and living God. So he's basically saying an idol is anything that we look to provide something that only God can provide. And when we apply that to evangelism, we have to ask ourselves, how could evangelism be an idol according to that definition? It's kind of like saying you've made an idol out of obeying God. But if we look at what is evangelism, if you were to ask a random sampling of evangelicals to define it, hopefully there's going to be most evangelicals would acknowledge that it involves sharing the gospel. It's not evangelism if you're not sharing the gospel. But hopefully most evangelicals would get that correct. But you're also going to hear people talk about different strategies, maybe relational evangelism or street corner preaching. A lot of people look at their Sunday morning service as an evangelistic opportunity, inviting people to church so they can hear the gospel. But most definitions are also going to say something about making converts. That, the goal of evangelism, we want to see people come to the Lord. We want to see them make decisions for Christ or follow Jesus, give their life to the Lord. However they phrase that, we tend to look at conversions as the goal. That's why we evangelize. But it's important to remember that the work of evangelism is not to make converts. The work of evangelism is to share the gospel. The results are not up to us. Making converts is what God does. He replaces the heart of stone with a heart of flesh. He plucks people out of darkness and into his marvelous light. It is the gospel that is the power of God to salvation. And I think where evangelism becomes an idol is when we look to our work of evangelism to provide something that only God can provide, namely conversions. And this incorrect idolatry of evangelism, looking to our efforts to provide, to make conversions, has really left the church unprepared for the cultural changes we're living through. And I want to go over 4 different ways in which that idol of evangelism has really neutered the church and left us where we're at. So the first thing, when we make an idol of evangelism, and we make that the measuring stick for how we're doing, when conversions are our measure of success, we tend to neglect discipleship. What we've done is we've reduced the Great Commission down to purely evangelism. If we're Great Commission Baptists, that means, we want to focus strictly on sharing the gospel and, evangelism. But if we actually look at what the text says, go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them. Okay, so if there's baptisms, that means that there is conversions. So we can so there is the sharing of the gospel, which God uses to produce conversions. But it goes on to say, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And we often forget that part of the Great Commission. That's discipleship. Evangelism is only one part of the Great Commission. And we gravitate toward it because it's the easy one to measure. Like, how are we doing? Well, we baptize this many people. And so, but discipleship, that is harder to measure. That's something that's measured in faithfulness over time. And so it doesn't, meet our kind of instant gratification, or, it doesn't, tell us how we're doing. It's harder to know. And that's not to say that the evangelical church has just completely bailed on discipleship. There's plenty of books about, how to improve your marriage, parenting books, have all kinds of studies on how to read the Bible, how to study, how to pray. The discipleship that we are failing to do is often the discipleship that we kind of see as in conflict with evangelism. So if we structure our Sunday morning service on reaching the lost, well, that passage, we probably don't want to preach on that. We don't want to provide discipleship on biblical sexuality because there might be lost people there. But evangelism is not at odds with the other commands of Scripture. A couple of examples. Ephesians 5:11 says, "Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them." When is the last time you went through a study with your small group on how to expose the unfruitful works of darkness? That sounds awfully confrontational. It's not winsome. So we're just going to ignore that. We're not going to provide discipleship there. Or, destroying arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God. Are we seeing any of that in our world? Yeah, absolutely. But where is the discipleship on how we confront these arguments and lofty opinions? When we structure our services around evangelism, when we make evangelism the ultimate goal in our, in our church life, then we're going to be dropping the ball on the things that our culture most needs, our Christians most need discipleship in right now. And so the solution to this, we've got to start prioritizing discipleship on the things that we're currently facing. I like to use the analogy that there's, we need to be students of the culture, to be able to be discerning, to see where the church needs discipleship. And so I liken it to a burning building. We can see there's a building burning over here, and there's people in the building, and we see other people headed to that building. They're on the same path to enter that building, but we will not disciple these people away from the burning building because there's people in the burning building that we really want to reach. And if we do that, they haven't recognized that they're in the burning building yet, and so we ignore discipling these people. Example, there are more and more videos online of women in their late 30s who have pursued career, who have believed the lies that fulfillment is found in a career, and they're waking up in their late 30s and realizing this is not fulfilling, and I want to be a wife and mother, and I'm afraid that opportunity has passed me by. I'm not going to have children. But in the church, we're neglecting to recognize that real aspect, that thing that's happening in culture, but we don't disciple our young women to consider that. We encourage them, no, don't get married too young. Go off, figure out your career first, and there's plenty of time for that. So that's just one example. The second area, and this is where I'll spend the bulk of the talk, When we make an idol of evangelism and we look to ourselves, it's our job to make converts, is we have embraced an attractional model of ministry. In the 80s and 90s, the church growth movement, this is really the idea that fueled that. They looked at a lot of sales and marketing techniques from the business world. They started applying those to the church and really shifted the message from one of the gospel being about sin and repentance and rescue from God's wrath, and basically turned Jesus and Christianity into a product to sell. And so when you are selling a product, it's more about how is this product beneficial to you. So you think about, you end up thinking about what's your target audience, what would be appealing to the people you're trying to reach. And over time, that has kind of homogenized into this kind of platonic ideal of what a non-Christian is. Like, we tend to think all non-Christians are leftists, all non-Christians, are cultural elites that are upwardly mobile. And if we're going to reach them, then we have to present these, we have to sell Christianity in this way. And that turns Jesus into a product. It changes the message to close the sale. We're highlighting the benefits. Here's how Jesus can make your life better. Here's how Jesus can, improve your marriage or help you with your kids. And so we, in positive world and neutral world, that was incredibly successful. Like, if we're looking purely at numbers, this was the era of the mega church. The churches were exploding, really just by taking a message to the world of, here's how Jesus can make your life better. But as we've transitioned into negative world, it changes the dynamic quite dramatically. When you are selling a product to people who are unaware of your product or apathetic about your product, you want to highlight the product's benefits. And so sales and marketing is your go-to. Let's market this product. But when your product is defective or even harmful, maybe it's caused some injuries, then you've got a different problem. Your problem at that point, you don't call sales and marketing, hey, we need to sell more of these products that people hate. You call public relations. And so as we've shifted into negative world, the church, the evangelical church, has had to keep up. It's a completely different dynamic where we have, instead of selling it to people who are apathetic, we have people who hate our product and who don't want, who believe it's harmful. They grew up in purity culture and that damaged them, and so now so the church has begun to respond to that, as if the church was a PR firm for God, as if he was a temperamental celebrity who has said some insensitive things in the past, and he used to be really angry and mean, but he's doing this new thing now, and he's all about love, and it causes us to soften the message. So instead of highlighting the benefits of Christianity, where we can still, all those things are true, this new dynamic we find ourselves in, the only way to appeal to people who hate your product is to make the product less offensive. So we soften the message to minimize offense. David Wells, an author who wrote a lot about the church growth movement, he wrote this back in 2004. He says, the evangelical church for some time has been slowly but inexorably stripping itself of its truth, doctrine, and discipline. In that process, it is stripping itself of the very things which would make it distinctive in this culture. Those things that would give it a place from which to speak, and those things that would give it something to proclaim. So while the cultural drift is one that is opening up a chasm between itself and Christian faith, Christians, by their techniques for growth and their compromises with the spirit of the age, are in effect trying to close that chasm in order to be successful. The more the culture abandons truth and goodness, which are absolute, the less the evangelical church speaks about truth and goodness, which are absolute. We've developed the ability to, so this was written in 2004. And so, the chasm between the world and Christianity at the time, and we look back with fondness on those times. So the chasm now is like breadths of galaxies. And so the progressive Christians are running as fast as they can, ditching everything they can to try and, close that gap between Christianity and the world. You don't like hell? Okay, we can scrap that. You don't like biblical sexuality? That's out of here too. If we just hold on to the resurrection, we can get rid of the Old Testament, whatever. Just please, give Jesus a chance. And so that's to be expected with the progressives. We've seen that, someone mentioned the fundamentalist modernists. That was the approach back in the 20s. But even conservative churches that want to hold on to the Bible can fall prey to this. We've become adept at what I call speaking to be misunderstood. And that's where we say something that we want the world to hear one way, that we're okay if they misunderstand us. An example of this, I recently saw a clip of Rick Warren on TV, and he was asked point blank, does homosexuality send you to hell? And he responded, said, no, homosexuality does not send you to hell. Rejecting the grace of God sends you to hell. And so the person interviewing him followed up and says, so gay people will go to heaven if they accept Christ? He says, absolutely. Did he say anything unscriptural? No. If a homosexual repents of their sin and accepts Christ, they will go to heaven. But what did the person listening to that hear? The person listening to that heard an affirming message, and Rick Warren was okay to let him believe that, because that closes the gap. I'm closer to the culture I'm trying to reach. And what this does is we see our leaders behave this way, is this type of communication that is done through our evangelical institutions from Sunday morning, is it filters down into how we interact with the people in our lives. So, I used to be a huge believer in relationship evangelism. And what I found was that, I'm trying to build these relationships, but I don't want to offend anybody. So I kind of smile and nod when something comes up, or if something comes up I disagree with, I try and change the subject. Anything to avoid letting my real beliefs, be communicated. Because that's what I saw modeled from the stage of our churches and, in the pages of our evangelical literature. But this turns us into chameleons. And so if the goal of relational evangelism is to build relationships with the hope that one day there will be gospel opportunities when life hits the fan and they turn to you, give me a reason for the hope that's in you. If we haven't, if we're not revealing who we are, we're not building real relationships. We have relationships in inch deep that no one is going to turn to us because they don't know who we are. And this fuels something that has really contributed, and I think this more than anything else, this is what the evangelical church has done that has contributed to where we're at right now in the culture. In the 1970s, a sociologist came up with a theory called the spiral of silence. The spiral of silence basically says that as humans, we fear social isolation. We don't want to be weird. And so we're constantly looking for cues in our interactions to see what type of beliefs, opinions, behavior produce social isolation. And so when we see those things, we tend to become quiet. And when we're quiet about our beliefs, opinions, behaviors that are outside the popular consensus, the opposing beliefs, opinions, and behaviors become more emboldened, which causes more silence on this side until you get to the point where one set of ideas is dominant and the other is completely absent. And so through our relational evangelism, we have contributed to that in society. And I think the solution to this approach, this making an idol of evangelism and embracing the attractional model, is we need to shift how we think about our presence in this world. We're not PR agents for God trying to soften his image. We are ambassadors for Christ. Ambassadors are sent to foreign countries with a special assignment as representatives of the sovereign who sent them. It's not our job to, an ambassador doesn't go into another country with his kind of own agenda to make the king look good. An ambassador goes in with, this is what the king says, this is what the king's agenda is, this is what the king wants. Paul talks about it twice in the New Testament. In 2 Corinthians 5:20, he says, "Therefore we are ambassadors for Christ, God making his appeal through us. We implore you on behalf of Christ, be reconciled to God." That's the message. God making his appeal through us. Not us, plussing his message. But he talks about it a second time that isn't as often quoted. He writes to the Ephesians from prison in Rome. He says, "Pray also for me, that words may be given to me in opening my mouth boldly to proclaim the mystery of the gospel, for which I am an ambassador in chains, that I may declare it boldly as I ought to speak." That's what the world needs right now. They need ambassadors for Christ that are prepared to represent the King, even if it means they put us in chains. And we need that boldness that Paul was asking the Ephesians to pray for. Jesus said, "Woe to you when all people speak well of you, for so their fathers did to the false prophets." We are not going to change the world's opinion of Jesus. We are not going to make it palatable to people who are perishing. In Corinthians it says that the cross of Christ is folly to those who are perishing. You're not going to PR that and massage that into something that is suddenly attractive unless God is doing a work in their hearts. So we need to let's deliver that message and leave the results to God. We need to speak to be understood. Going back to the Rick Warren example, there is no excuse. If someone asks you what the Bible says about something or what you believe about something, there is no excuse for you to leave that interaction. Leave them with any ambiguity about that. Let's speak to be understood. I think Michael's going to be speaking about how language is used. We need to be aware of that and be aware of how our listeners hear what we're saying and make sure that they have an understanding. We need to be faithful in those things. And then in our personal interactions, we need to let our yes be yes and our no be no. When we're building relationships with people, we need to resist that spiral of silence. We need to be, the Bible talks about it as the fear of man. Like, we don't need to give in to the fear of man. It may be that God is using you to, build relationships that are going to be based, when we have that in mind, if this is what the non-Christian is, we can tailor our message to what they have. But you don't know what people think, because other people, non-Christians, get caught into the spiral of silence as well. So it may be that if you're brave enough to say, actually, I have a different opinion about that, they may respond with, you too? Oh, I thought I was the only one. And that is what C.S. Lewis said, that's the moment of friendship is built. But it may be that they find your views abhorrent and don't want that relationship. But we can't let that fear of pushing people away trap us in this place where we're staying on the surface, because those aren't real relationships that people are actually going to ask about the hope that's in you. The third area where problem with an idol of evangelism and what that the negative effect of that is, it turns other Christians into obstacles to evangelism. So if we're responsible for making converts, and we've got this in mind of what non-Christians need to hear and need to see, this is where the idea of public witness comes in. Like this witness that all of us Christians have, collectively together. If we're doing our best to present a certain face on Christianity, and then Uncle Bob shows up with his MAGA hat on, suddenly he's threatening to undo the work I've been doing to reach people. And so instead of proclaiming the message, I direct my attention over here to tell Bob, cut it out. You're hurting our public witness. And this is how you end up with people writing Sunday newsletters every Sunday, correcting the church, because it's in opposition to their conception of evangelism and what is required to actually reach people right now. This is also, what's responsible for the tone policing we see so much. Why is it that so many Christians who are reluctant to call out dangerous teaching are always the first to tone police other Christians? So it's, they're timid, and we need to grant good faith and believe the best until it's someone who is, not appealing to their target audience. And then it's like, no, we got to crush that. It's really the spirit of the Pharisees. When the Pharisees finally had enough of Jesus and went to, decided they needed to murder him, they said, if we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. And that's what we have. We see a lot of Christians that are like, we're going to lose our influence if they keep talking this way. We've got to embrace Christian liberty. If it's not our job to make converts, it's our job to present the gospel. God is going to use a variety of different means to do that, a variety of different strategies. There is no one size fits all. And we need to recognize that and know that whatever Bob's doing over here is not going to keep anyone from coming to Jesus that God has, if God's working in their life. We saw this a lot during COVID with the love your neighbor. If you love your neighbor, you'll do this. And I think perhaps early on there was a lot of concern about actually loving your neighbor, but at some point it kind of morphed into, you're hurting our public witness if you don't go along with this. And I think we've got to be really, really careful not to trample on Christian liberty. God's going to use the abolitionists that are in front of abortion clinics every week. And I've gotten to know some over the past couple of years, and just the stories I'm hearing, that's not the approach I would naturally take. I don't think I would be gifted in that scenario as confrontational as that is, but God is using it, and God is going to use the winsome guy over here. God's going to use Uncle Bob. We just need to let God do what he's going to do and focus on the people that are in our sphere of influence and stop policing everyone else. And the last thing that I wanted to touch on, when we make an idol of evangelism, we are producing false converts. Amen. J.I. Packer wrote in Evangelism and the Sovereignty of God, he says, Jesus did not desire to make disciples under false pretenses. He had no interest in gathering vast crowds of professed adherents who would melt away as soon as they found out what following him actually demanded. And that's where we're at. I think that's one of the biggest reasons why churches are reluctant to address our most pressing cultural needs right now, is because they know that that's going to crank up the heat and that a lot of these false converts are going to fall away. And that has very real consequences on your staff that you're trying to keep employed. It's a difficult situation for pastors. So I like to have a lot of grace on pastors, but at some point we've got to trust God and begin seeing the situation we're in with reality, with clear eyes. My friend James Wood gave a talk last year at the Negative World Conference called Sheep, Fools, and Wolves. And I think he actually turned it into an American Reformer piece as well. But in that, he says that we have 3 types of people in our church, and we need to start recognizing that. We have the sheep who are starving. They want to be fed. They're in woke workplaces. They are, seeing the stuff that's being taught at schools and unsure what to do about it. They're starving. They need discipleship. They need guidance. Then you have fools who may or may not be Christian. They may be baby Christians, or they may be people who are open to the gospel, just haven't actually been converted yet. And they are being led astray by the ideology of the world. It sounds good to them because they're not being corrected and discipled on Sunday morning. And then the third group of people we have in our church are the wolves that have come in pushing an agenda and are trying to devour the sheep and the fools. And we need to be unapologetic in running them off. We need to guard the flock. And there's more I could say there, but I would just direct you to James Wood's talk last year on that. It's really helpful. But lest I do not want anyone to hear me saying we shouldn't be concerned about evangelism. That is not at all what I'm saying. We've got to think about it correctly, though. It's not about making converts, it's about sharing a message. And we have an incredible opportunity in front of us, like Chase was saying last night. There's an openness to the gospel. In places that don't fit that paradigm, that picture of what a non-Christian is. I was listening or watched a YouTube video about a year ago with 2 ladies who used to be woke activists. And they both kind of saw through a lot of the crazy that was happening and became red-pilled and became Trump supporters. And they, in that process of kind of rethinking where a lot of beliefs that they had previously had, they eventually got around to Christianity and had recently become Christians. Amen. And so in this YouTube talk, they're talking about what they're learning from the Bible, and they're just giddy about all the things they're learning. And one of them was like a Twitch gamer girl or something who was known for like her goth appearance and dark. She's like, I don't dress that way anymore. I don't want to be associated with darkness. Like there's a light in my life now. And that's if we're so focused on this is what a non-Christian is, this is what the non-Christians need to hear, we're going to miss the opportunities around us and the openness to a gospel that is in unexpected places. I'm going to close with another quote from J.I. Packer. He says, "You have no reason to be ashamed of your message, or half-hearted and apologetic in delivering it. You have every reason to be bold and free and natural and hopeful of success. For God can give his truth an effectiveness that you and I cannot give it. God can make his truth triumphant to the conversion of the most seemingly hardened unbeliever." God give us that boldness, that confidence in his Holy Spirit to do that work. And let's focus on delivering the message. Amen. Thanks.
Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe and share with a friend. Truth matters.